Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Rhineliner podcast, where we explore everything about existence. So if existence is something that you like to find out about, why we're here and all that good jazz, please hit the like button and subscribe. It is how we can get you more content and how YouTube knows that we are here. Our guest today is Emmy Vadnais. And she is an occupational therapist, intuitive healer, and health coach. She is also the author of Intuitive Development, How to Trust Your Inner Knowing for Guidance in Relationships, Health, and Spirituality, and is also a co-host of a really great show called No Thinking Aloud with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, and is the founder of the Holistic OT community at her private practice in St. Paul, Minnesota. So Emmy, thank you very much for being here with us today. It's very nice to have you on the show. And so do you want to give everybody just, a little bit of kind of what you do there, and then we can go straight into, talking about intuition and intuitive thoughts and practicing that.
Ryan, thank you so much for having me here. It is a true joy to be with you. And I think the more that we can share these kinds of information to people, the better the world is. And so I'm really grateful for you for helping me share a little bit about my experience so that others may find something relevant in their own lives that maybe will pique their interest and help them somehow.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to share, I'm the co-host on New Thinking Aloud. And it was funny because I think I heard you say no, unless that's an accent, No Thinking Aloud.
I hope it was an accent.
because it is interesting. I don't remember who said it, but the longest journey somebody might take in their life is from their head to their heart. And so I think it's kind of interesting how I heard you at least say no thinking aloud. Really, new thinking aloud is encouraging people to have these kind of conversations, and the allowed, ALLOWED, is a play on the word, meaning that it's allowed to think in new ways, and also that you can think aloud like we're doing here today. And I just want to offer that it's interesting how you pronounce that, because one could argue that maybe a lot of us maybe think too much. And I would suggest that as we go into our conversation here today, this might be setting the tone for, as we connect with our intuition, we're moving into other ways of thinking or knowing or being than we typically are throughout our normal waking consciousness days. Although I do know that I believe everybody is intuitive, and some are just more aware of that. Some might have a better sense of how they intuit. Some are maybe on a journey of how to harness that, which is what happened to me. I had some intuitive, precognitive experiences that I couldn't explain, that gave me verified information that piqued my interest and had me on this journey. And I'll just share that my brother has 3 children, and all 3 of his children, I had dreams about them before the mother, or right around the time she was aware that she was pregnant. Very early on, in one case, it was even before she was pregnant. I knew what they looked like. I knew what the sex, the gender, the personality was like, who they might be like in the family. And each time that happened, I just thought, how is this possible? It really does show that we exist. For me anyway, it really proved that we exist before we come to this earthly plane.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's really unique. A lot of different people have that sort of thing happen, and they just kind of let it go and pass it off. They don't really pay attention to and don't get into it there. But, to jump into the book here, it starts off like, I just want to say one thing about this. I've read a lot of different books on these sorts of subjects, and sometimes you have to read all 266 pages to understand the concept of what somebody's talking about. This is a book that anybody out there should be able to get and understand really, really well. The chapters are very bullet pointed in a good orderly system. And you've got these kind of call to actions at the end of everything with breathing exercises. So it's not just here's a thought and then on to the next one. So really like that, because there's a lot of books out there. Like I said, it's people kind of get into them and they're just like, where is this going? And I think they lose interest when there's not like an actual, it's almost you're being taught as opposed to just listening to somebody's opinions, which I think is very, very cool in this particular area. So the first things first, I would say just for people out there that maybe don't really have any experience with this sort of thing, what is intuition and what is that versus maybe I've got a feeling about something that it's texting somebody at 12:30 at night. That's not intuition. That's a terrible decision you're making probably. What is that versus how does somebody kind of know the difference and what is intuition then?
Unless you're saving somebody's life at 12:30.
Yeah, if it's an X, it's probably not a good
Excellent
idea.
decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, intuition. So this is just from my experience and what I've come to understand. Intuition is our inner knowing, our inner wisdom. It's the truth. It's our inner compass. I would suggest that for me, it's definitely synonymous with truth and love, beauty. There's a Sanskrit term, Satchitananda, which I've seen interpreted as truth, consciousness, bliss. I believe it's where we feel at home within ourselves, and we all have this throughout our days. We also, in our dreams, one of the primary ways that people can have their intuition speak to them is often through dreams because we're not distracted with daily activities. Oftentimes people can receive, such as I did in my life, precognitive information where we're able to receive knowledge before an event seemingly occurs. So one could say that intuition is a form of knowing or gnosis that is, so those are some ways of what intuition is. And also it could be synonymous for people with spirituality, God, spirit guides, angels, the higher self, unconditional love, unconditional acceptance, compassion. So all those higher ways of being, that wise counsel that we may want to seek out, we have those answers and that insight within us. And when we get quiet enough and allow the thoughts to settle, the conditioned thinking, beliefs, distractions, and so forth, we can listen more clearly to that. And there are methods that I outline in my book. And I also have a YouTube channel that people can check out with free exercises on there as well to harness that. So one way to think about what intuition is also what is it not? Intuition, I would suggest, is not logical, rational, analytical, judgmental thinking. It is when we need that. I'm a huge fan of logic. I love logic. And I suggest that we need all of this. However, we can be too caught up in overthinking, overanalyzing, or even caught up in emotions that are not our intuition, although intuition can speak through our emotions. But we can have emotions, for example, if we're grieving, going through normal grieving, or if we have unresolved wounds from the past, sometimes even in the category of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And most of us have trauma with a little t, and many also have trauma with a big T, where we have experiences growing up where we felt less than, we didn't feel worthy or lovable or loved. And those can cause hindrances with us being able to connect more deeply with ourselves. I know for me, it's been a journey of self-love, self-acceptance, and deeply connecting with that part of myself. So again, we all have intuition. Some of us are more connected to it than others. But once you can understand how you intuit, which is often through what we consider our five senses, and also there's a term called interoception, which is really all of the felt senses that we experience. Once you know how you intuit or which senses are more strong for you, then you can pay attention to those more easily and more readily.
Yeah, that is fantastic. I like that a lot. That's a great answer. You kind of you kind of got into this there, but just, with different people out there that are, how does intuition really, assist people versus that logical train of thought? There's a lot of people out there that still think, no, logic and everything is what I need to do. They consider intuition to be woo-woo, or something, to use any of those terms there. First, what would you say to somebody who is very sort of like blinders on about just simply doing everything through their logical analyzation of things?
Well, I'm not here to suggest what somebody should or shouldn't do in their lives. I think that if you're doing something and it's working for you, great. However, if you're doing something for you for yourself and it works some of the time or majority of the time or not as much of the time as you would like, I would consider that you explore your intuition more, because there is information there that we can glean when we step back from the rapid thinking. And what's lovely about intuition is that it can also help us pull back from overthinking, overanalyzing, getting caught up in, and step back into where the thoughts can slow down. And I mean, how many times have any of you, or you, Ryan, where you've been thinking about something, you go out for a walk, you mentioned before we started recording, you have a dog, I have a dog too, and you go out in nature, and then you all of a sudden just pops in your mind. That happened to me the other day. I was thinking about, I know somebody who's going to be moving into the Twin Cities and they need a place to stay. And we were thinking about options for them. And I went out and did some gardening, and all of a sudden I thought, oh my gosh, I have this friend who has a home, who is going through some changes in their life, or they have space in their home. And it just came to me like this eureka. That's our intuition speaking to us. And that's when we can step back, we can receive that information. And it also, another adage is sleep on it, or maybe taking a nap. And logic can give us information, and I would suggest that we can use both, and that it isn't an either or. We can glean information. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of logic. We want to understand if A, then B, then C, or if there's not something that's cogent. We want to understand what's happening there, and we can use the intuition as sort of a complement, not necessarily a supplement, because I don't necessarily say that a hierarchy, that logic is necessarily better than intuition, but they can go hand in hand with each other. And then once you use your intuition, whether that's quieting the mind or using some type of tool like cards, intuitive cards, a pendulum, or whatever, but ultimately those are just tools to help you connect with what you already know within yourself. Then you can get that information and you can kind of weigh it out. Even like with the balance, with Libra, the balance scales, what feels right to me. And that's a big piece of getting information from intuition, is that as we receive that intuitive information or connect with what's there inside of us, or what we perceive as inside of us, we can then discern what feels right. And one of the best ways that intuition has helped me in my life and the people I've supported connecting with their intuition is that it can help you more deeply understand and know yourself, which is perhaps maybe the ultimate, or one of the biggest reasons we're all here, is discovering that, and to get guidance with any questions you might have, and to also understand if you're going through some type of challenge or transition, to get insight into meaning or purpose, or what might help your situation if you're going through a struggle. Because intuition came into my life more clearly when I had a teacher, because I was going through a very difficult time, and it was intuition that really pulled me out of the dark night of my soul. And I think that it's your own best friend that's always there day or night. And consistently in my life, it's a resource, a tool that can help us on this path or journey in life toward more joy, peace, love, harmony, greater relationship with ourselves, relationship with others, and achieving or attaining what really is in alignment with our own soul, because each of us are unique in that. And part of my karmic path, if you will, seems to be talking about, sharing about intuition. And for somebody else, it'll certainly be different. And so we can move past some of that conditioning that maybe we were raised with, or even societal or cultural conditioning of what we think we should do or should achieve in order to, quote, be successful in life.
Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful. Let's talk about where intuition comes from. This is, I love the fact that you have an entire chapter in here that starts out, I think it's number 3. Where does intuition come from? And you get into energy and connection of energy. I got into this all at 19 when I bought a book about quantum mechanics by a guy named Nick Herbert. And it was the first time I didn't even know what quantum mechanics was. I just knew everything was an atom at its lowest amount and then particles, and that was it. and that they were kind of empty space, but somehow they had gravitational mass to them type of deal. But I'd never really gotten any further into it. Could you, for people who do not know anything about quantum mechanics, and if you don't, please go out and read some kind of beginner's guide to quantum mechanics. It will open up the universe and understanding it so much better for you. But for somebody here who doesn't have any experience with that, how, you and I may think of this sort of field of information out there, right, that we can somehow just tap into, and people kind of have a hard time understanding that. Could you talk about quantum mechanics and energy and how it's connected, how you kind of see that entire thing?
Mm. Yeah, quantum mechanics, quantum physics. I'm not a physicist, so I'm not an expert on it. However, and even my understanding is even physicists are scratching their heads and don't fully comprehend or understand all of it either. However, I don't want to pretend that I have it all wrapped up in a bow with what that is, but I can share a little bit about my current understanding of that. So quantum meaning quanta, which is a smallest, very small level. You mentioned particles. So when we get behind molecules, atoms, particles, what is there? And some people talk about how there's nothing there. Some say that there's this void, dark matter. Some suggest Robert Temple, who we've had on as a guest on New Thinking Aloud, he talks about plasma, that perhaps it's a form of plasma, and he suggests that maybe everything is a form of plasma. So it used, yeah, because when we think about what's, seemingly solid, or what we perceive as having these perceived physical bodies, or this so-called physical or material world we live in, one could suggest that really it is a continuum of energy, what is energy, but maybe one could say frequency or vibration of what this seemingly void might be, which I would suggest is actually what interconnects all of us, what we take ourselves to be separate from each other. However, while yes, we have our own seemingly separate identities, some might say like the ego, we're really all facets perhaps of the same diamond, if you will. And that we are here perhaps growing and expanding evolving in our awareness, love, creativity, to understand. Some have suggested that the universe is expanding creatively to understand itself. So if we take the premise that everything is interconnected, and if you look at parapsychology experiments, in fact, Jeffrey Mishlove, who is the host and producer of New Thinking Aloud, he graciously wrote the foreword for my book. He cites a study by Etzal Kardemia in the foreword of my book about, I think it's like 1,500 parapsychological studies that have been researched for 150 years that really point to that, yes, telepathy is real, psychic functioning is real, being able to have precognitive information is real. It's just how and when does that arise, and how can we, if we're meant to, get that under more of our own volition, where intuition may be receiving information, and then it's a matter of what do we do with that information? What do we want to create or manifest in our lives? And I would suggest that focus and intention are very powerful and probably interact with that quanta, if we're going to call it that, or energy. Some talk about collapsing the wave function. When we focus on something, that we are shifting what's happening with that, as you mentioned beautifully, the field, the energetic or thought field or mental consciousness field. Consciousness is another great word, because underlying all of this is really perhaps the consciousness that we all share, that collective consciousness. And essentially, we are more powerful than we take ourselves to be if we do allow ourselves to cultivate these parts and to understand more deeply when intuition speaks to us and how it can serve us for our own highest good and greatest joy in those around us. So I don't know, does that answer your question, Ryan, about quantum mechanics? Or is there anything you want to add? Because you've read a lot about it as well.
No, I thought that's a really good that's a really good explanation of it. I'm not a physicist either. I'm one of those people who, subscribes to physics.org and reads all the articles type of thing. So I understand it, but no, I'm not going to go teach a course on it. But no, I think that that was a really good way of putting it. I feel like there's sort of these two big hangups in modern 2025 society that is starting to go away, but that have been holding things up. And I think one of them is, no pun intended, it's hard. We can't quantify how these different things are happening. How is the quanta moving? How is somebody actually, what's the physical process happening for me to be able to be telepathic with somebody in a room next to me and read the card they're holding up? And because, like you said, 1,500 different parapsychological research projects. This is Yale, Stanford University, Harvard University, Oxford. It's all of these people that are not going to be faking stuff. And so when they're finding these results and then they can't explain them, that's where everybody goes, well, then what do you want us to do with it if we can't explain it? You know, it's sort of hard to be able to get scientific recognition for things when you can't explain the process that's actually going on, I think. And then we've kind of got this other thing for a
Well,
very
from a
long,
materialistic perspective, perhaps, because some
yeah,
people really need to see it from a scientific,
e-
materialistic perspective.
exactly.
I'm not entirely one of those, although I love that and I think that's helpful. However, in my book, I do in each chapter cite about 10 to 20 research studies that does support what I'm offering and suggesting. So I'm not just blowing in the wind about intuition,
Exactly.
although that's okay too.
Yeah, no, I think it's something that's going away. I think people used to have that I need to see the equation as to how it's happening, or I need the mechanical process I can run a patent office type of thing on. And people are really just kind of getting away from that with, I know how cell phones work. I don't really know how the waves work but somehow they are. So I think that's coming across. So for somebody who out there who says, this is something I want to do. I want to connect with this more often there. What are some of the really good ways to connect with intuition?
Yeah, well, there are many ways, and if I can just dovetail a little bit of what we were just talking about, that
Yeah,
I do think that the people who are more cerebral, and I consider myself in that camp as well. Although
yeah,
I think I have a pretty good balance of intuition and logic, and I'm still in development with my intuition as well. It's strengthened tremendously for me in the 25 years that I've been studying and practicing it. And also that trust is, I think, fundamental with developing your intuition. So when a person is very much in a prove it to me state, they're in the thinking mind that's going to keep them stuck from receiving their intuition. So yes, we can look at what is a materialistic, perceived physical explanation for it. However, another way, and this is where most people actually become to believe or have trust in it, and this is why I think some of these things get labeled as woo, because I think the people who haven't had those experiences are going to look at it that way. And it's having an experience. So I started out sharing with you that I've had other experiences, but that was the one that was the most strong, verifiable, and literal humans came out of my dreams that were accurate. I wasn't dreaming about 10 or 20 or 100 other children or babies. I had the same dream about each of those beings, those humans. And when they came out, it was like I was seeing them for the second, third, fifth, 12th time. It was not my first time meeting them. As far as where intuition comes from, I think when I started writing that chapter, I was also pondering that myself. And I'd been teaching classes for a number of years. And I would think about, does it come through the mind, through what we perceive as the mind and the head? Now, I've come to understand that, like Max Planck and these other people, that
yeah,
really intuition, or excuse me, consciousness, the brain might be really more of like a filter or reducing valve
yeah,
for our consciousness. However, yes, the central nervous system is still important, and I'm still respect neuroscience. However, neuroscience, I don't think we're going to find all the answers in neuroscience for this. And then I also thought, well, one of my teachers, or my main teacher, often talked about, and we practice meditating on the heart and actually even harmonizing the head and the heart. And I thought, well, maybe intuition is in the heart. Groups like the Heart Math Institute that do a beautiful job of showing how the heart has a larger electromagnetic field than the brain, something like 60 times the amplitude.
hmm,
Last I heard from the research, and there's been even research that shows that the heart, or the physiology of the heart, will, quote, know before the brain does, meaning that when people are hooked up to electrophysiological machines, that their heart responds. For example, if they're randomly shown images on a computer that have certain emotional qualities,
Right.
respond about a split second or whatever the milliseconds are before the brain does. So that shows that the heart is very important for connecting with precognitive, because intuition is really an umbrella that I think shows the knowing that we have that can be telepathic, it can be precognitive, and so forth, out of body experiences, as one might suggest. Developing your intuition, I would just encourage everybody to think about, because I think everybody has these experiences for the most part, a time that you knew that your intuition, or you had a hunch. Sometimes people don't even use the word intuition. They'll say like, oh, I had a gut feeling, or I had a hunch, or just a knowing.
Like instincts.
An instinct, exactly. And you followed that, and things panned out well. They flowed really nicely for you, or flew, however you say that, in your life. And how did you know your intuition was speaking to you then? And so this is a way, first and foremost, is to get a sense of how you already naturally have yourself as a divine human instrument open to intuition. And then think about a time in your life where you made a choice or took a path or direction in your life, and you look back and you think, oh my gosh, I knew better. I shouldn't have done this, or I should have done that. And then you kick yourself. And then I would ask you, how did your intuition speak to you then? How did your gut or hunch or whatever, what was that knowing or feeling? Did you see? Because we can have it through all of our senses. We can hear information. We can, and of course that gets into, like, I know schizophrenia, although, which we can certainly discuss if you want, and think about if it's benevolent information versus challenging, or what that relationship is. But we're talking about hearing something that's maybe guiding you in a positive direction, seeing with inner sight, or some people actually can see, like a friend of mine who worked in a transitional care unit at a skilled nursing facility with me would actually see spirits, and she would know who was about to pass. So there's different ways that we can see in the material world. Now, I just want to mention that sometimes people can have fear around this, because they've been taught something around that this maybe isn't okay.
I
Or
was just going to say that.
and actually, I think that that's the biggest barrier or block. So I would just encourage people that you can allow your intuition to be, with your intention, you can allow it to be as open or as closed or modulated, or get in, get out, as my teacher would say, with certain situations, as you want it to be. And also, sometimes people feel that we're opening up to the devil or to the demons and so forth. And I would say that if you believe that, then I would encourage you to do whatever rituals or prayers or contemplative or meditation practices, which I think is a good idea anyway, but that you think will support you with that. The protection piece is kind of tricky, because ultimately, if you're in alignment with your higher, loving, compassionate self, to me, I feel like that is synonymous with what a lot of people perceive as God. I very much believe that if we think, I don't personally think as God necessarily as a personified individual. However, God may take forms in that, and one can say we are all God, or we're all facets of God. But I would say that God is love. So when we are in that state of love, nothing can harm us. We're not going to have any invisible forces coming, because we're really emanating that higher vibration anyway. And there's something called the clairs. They mean clear in French. There's like clairaudience, clear hearing, clairvoyance, clear
Clear
seeing.
audio.
Yeah, there's all these different ways that we can use our senses to perceive intuition. I think your question is, what kind of methods can people engage in? And really, the ancient wisdom traditions for millennia really point to that quieting the mind is really probably the primary way to allow your intuition to speak to you. And what does that mean to quiet the mind? It means to pull back from overthinking, to get into the present moment, just being here now, like Ram Dass said,
Mhm.
versus thinking about the past or the future. And that can take some practice to do that because we are very, in our, at least in the Western world, I mean, a lot of this in indigenous cultures, I mean, this is just normal to them.
Yeah,
And they,
yeah,
and, you know, they have their own way of connecting with it. And for some shamanic practitioners, it might be connecting with the ancestors. I mean, they have different ways of, and I'm a fan of that too. In fact, I just interviewed a woman, Tamala Floyd, about connecting with your wise and well ancestors, so you can connect with again those nice high, loving vibrations. So quieting the mind is really paramount. And for people listening, and some people are into this, and some people might bristle at this, developing a meditation practice is really the best way. Now, meditation can be joyful and it can be pleasant and peaceful. In fact, I think it's meant to be. However, some people find when they begin meditating that all of the noise or the emotions that they've kind of suppressed in their mind or busied themselves from having to listen to comes up to the surface and it can be uncomfortable. However, I would encourage you to find a meditation teacher. And there's a quote from Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching that I'm paraphrasing here that's something to the effect of, can you sit long enough so the mud in the water of your mind settles and becomes clear and the answer arises on its own?
mm,
And essentially, I feel that in meditation, that's what we're doing. However, I have in my book, and there's many other resources about how you can have a successful meditation practice, such as this is how yoga is practiced, where you do the physical postures, asanas, as my teacher said, so that you can then sit and commune with God. Because when you engage it, and if yoga is not your thing, maybe it's going out for a walk in nature, maybe it's lifting some weights. I love gardening. I mean, I do those things too, but maybe going out and gardening or taking a nice relaxing bath or a hot tub, doing something where you can just be in the present moment, connect with your body, and allow that mind to settle, then you're able to access that information more easily. There are a few different exercises that I have found to be very helpful. Uh, One is simply using yourself as an instrument where you can allow, once you get into a quiet state, and this is where intention and attention and attention and focus is very important, is what is it that you're intending? What is it that you want to get information about? And then to focus and perhaps imagine that you're connecting with your higher self, or that you're inviting in some type of wise being, or it could even be some type of image. It could be an animal, it could be an object, the wind, the sun, the rain, a current or past loved one, a spirit guide or God or angels. And then you can allow yourself to communicate with that being in that inner relaxed focused state, because you're going to be able to get more information and you're going to be not second guessing or doubting it. Remember, I said trust is very important for intuition. And then you can allow a dialogue to come forward. I have that on my YouTube channel and a recording. And that's a really nice way to connect. And then also I was taught by my spiritual intuitive teacher how to make my own intuitive cards and with my own images. And then, in fact, I just taught a class last night on that. I have it's now available as a recording if people are interested. It's also, the instructions are in my book. And that's a fabulous way because you're using your own images to connect with your own soul, ask questions, and then you can simply pull one card and use symbolic interpretation to receive information. Sometimes it's very clear guidance, and sometimes our intuition comes to us in a symbolic language, metaphorically, that needs to be interpreted.
yeah. That's absolutely wonderful, man. There's so much different stuff to unpack there. You give so many answers there. Yeah, I was going to ask you to jump into creating the intuitive cards. When I saw that in there, I just you, excuse me. I get rune stones, and I know there's other people who have different things, tea leaf reading, all that kind of stuff. Is that kind of functioning under the same principle that, you're going to pull whatever card your subconscious kind of, or the universe, somehow you're going to pull the card that's necessary for you to see at that moment to provide you with clarity on the situation. Somehow. We don't
Definitely.
know exactly how it works. It just works.
Well, I used to think that, and the more that I've gone on, I believe it works because it is our higher knowing. It is our true self. We do know what will help us. And if we allow ourselves to get quiet, to get centered, to engage in 5 to 15 minutes of meditation or some type of meaningful ritual. It could be lighting a candle, burning incense, aromatherapy, essential oils in a diffuser, playing soft music, having a nice waterfall or fountain, or having kind of a little altar behind me is sort of what I might consider my own little altar. I have flowers that are meaningful to me. I have this little birch candle that to me, I love birch trees, and that's an element from nature. And then I have stones and crystals behind me and other meaningful objects that can help you get into that state of love and that divine connection or spiritual connection if you have spiritual leanings. Even if you identify as atheist, you don't have to have any spiritual or religious belief. This is functions, it can function independently of and with that. In fact, I would suggest that many, if not all, of the world's spiritual and religious practices and teachings are really built off of this kind of way of being, because it is authentic to who we are. And once you create that space internally and externally for yourself, you can have an intention and write down your questions. The more clear your questions are, and it can be about a topic, or it can simply be what will help me, or simply what do I need to know in general in my life, or what do I need to know about some topic in my life. And then you can pull a card. Of course, there are store-bought decks, oracle cards. Some people, the
Arrow.
traditional tarot. Yeah, I think there's 78 cards in that. Whatever resonates with you. And I have many store-bought decks. They're like candy to me. They all have their own personalities. I use my intuitive card deck and another store-bought deck probably the most at the moment. And it's a great reflection back to, as my teacher would say, what we already know inside of us. It's just a tool to help us focus and connect with what we know inside already.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I want to go back for a second here into ways to connect with your intuition, because there's one thing, you have yoga listed in there. Yoga is very popular, and there's lots of different styles and everything for it. What kind of style or yogic practices have you found best for intuition and psychic development, all kind of together there?
What a beautiful question. I'm a huge fan of yoga. Of course, there's many types, and the definitions that I've come to understand is a yoking or union with the divine, really the divine within ourselves and the greater divine, as we've talked about with kind of quantum mechanics, that we are all interconnected. And so by practicing yoga, it's a way for us to connect with that part of us, which one could also say is intuition. I am not aware of any particular style that is better or less than with yoga. I can certainly share what I've come to practice.
Sure, yeah.
Um, and I think that there are many styles out there that I've also practiced, but one that I probably practice the most. And I would just encourage everybody throughout this entire conversation to just follow what you feel is right for you on this path, and to also seek out a teacher. I think it's really important. Of course, we know that there's a lot of free information online, which can be useful. However, a teacher is going to help you navigate pitfalls. It's going to help you probably expedite your growth. Not that it's a race, however, so that you can get more of the fruits more quickly.
Yeah.
And maybe have less frustration. And that's why I wrote my book, is because I want to support people to be able to access this in a way that is more simple and less arduous maybe than how it maybe took for me, and just to kind of clarify or give suggestions. So ultimately find what works best for you. I took yoga classes at like health fitness centers, and the one that I practice the most is actually Iyengar yoga.
Okay.
Comes from BKS Iyengar, and he is credited as probably Well, he is. He's one of the first yogis to bring yogi to the West and definitely to the United States. What I like about Iyengar yoga, which makes sense with intuition, is that it does slow you down. One of the tenets of Iyengar yoga is that you hold the poses for 1 to 5 or 10 minutes or more, the postures, and you really sink into them. And through that process, that is a meditative process and allows the mind to settle, but also for the mind, body, spirit to really come into harmony. Now, I've done vinyasa flow, and one can argue that it's all hatha yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga, but there's different styles and ways that people like to practice. I get warm enough practicing yoga, so I don't need to do the Bikram hot yoga for me personally. Some people like that because it helps open up their joints and they find that that just really resonates with them. So I'm not here to deter what people might find intuitively works best for them, but that's the one that I enjoy. And also, I know a lot of yoga practices now do incorporate different props, bolsters, blocks, blankets, straps. However, I think that Iyengar yoga was one of, if not the first, to start bringing that forward. In fact, BKS Iyengar had some type of illness. I don't actually know what it was. It was, I don't know if it was like a lung or some type or immune. He had some type of illness, but he credits yoga with healing himself. And so now there's all this great research. And this is what I love about intuition, the practices that support us with intuition. There's a whole body of knowledge, and I cite some of it in my book as well, about how many, if not all of the same, I would say all of the same practices really that connect us with our intuition also can help us with our health, wellness, our well-being, and in many cases, probably the prevention of illness and disease, because it helps us get into a increased relaxation response state, which is what meditation ultimately does when you really can settle in and find one that works well for you. And the relaxation response state has been shown to lower cortisol levels with stress, which we're now coming to find causes inflammation and can cause chronic conditions, and also can help heal all the way to the genetic level. A person named Dr. Herbert Benson, who coined the term the relaxation response, which is the opposite of the stress response, because his colleagues, when he was researching this, he hypothesized that blood pressure was correlated with stress. Anyway, long story short, his colleagues were saying, oh, it's just a placebo. So he started studying the placebo, and he found that even when people do have a chronic condition, there's scientific research, statistically significant research, that in many cases, depending on how advanced the disease is, but people can reverse even like heart disease, diabetes, and things like that. I mean, it's a whole lifestyle. Like Dean Ornish talks about a whole lifestyle approach. What we eat or don't eat, how we sleep, the social connections we have or don't have, all of that are really important in our lives. But that's why I think that intuition can also really support a healthy lifestyle for living with our greatest joy, which really is connected to, really is the mind body. The mind body is not separate. It really is one. And the mind body spirit is all one, as you talk about with quantum mechanics and energy, that we are energy beings. And that when we can harmonize with our intuition or even engage in practices so in harmonizing with our intuition, we can help our energy flow better, which also in turn then helps what we perceive as our physical body function better. And then if we can also engage in energy practices is another way that I came to connecting with, where I learned medical Qigong energy healing, where I did cultivation of my I still practice this internal energy practices. And sometimes it's referred to as internal martial arts, but you're not fighting anything. You're increasing the flow. And then I also was taught how to sense other people's energy, assess and balance their chi or energy. And we use intuition in that process. I know a lot of people, Reiki has gotten really popular. I think it's gotten popular because it's something you can learn in a weekend or several weekends. My training was about almost 2-year training. And my intuition really grew with that. And then when I was practicing as a massage therapist around this time, because I found that meditation and massage, body work, reflexology, I was going through a lot of stress at the time when I came into studying intuition, that it really helped lower stress and help me to feel better. And when I was giving those body work sessions, massage and body work sessions, that I started receiving messages about people. And I started asking people, is it okay if I share messages with you? And I even put it on my intake form. And 99% of the people said yes. And and so I started sharing information that was very useful for them. And then I started teaching people how to connect with their own intuition, because it's kind of that adage of, you can give somebody a fish and they're going to eat a meal, but if you can teach them how to fish, they can eat for life.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I like that a lot. Um, to go back to something when we were talking about just sort of energy and everything being connected there, you had brought up Max Planck
Mm.
earlier, and I quote him on a couple of different things. For one thing, one of his statements that he said, and I think this is something we're kind of dealing with that goes back to that old ways of thinking. He said, science does not progress because young scientists come up with new ideas. It progresses because old guys die, basically. He said it's a little bit morbid, but it's a fact. He said people try to hold on to pushing their
Mm.
views on things. They're not always going to be receptive to the new information that's coming in. Um, and then he went into also then right after that talking about that the reason he was saying that was because, he was this father of quantum mechanics and talked about the fact, he said, if you want to know how many human consciousnesses there are, the answer is one. That's it. All of the different consciousness, you're like a unit of awareness that's a part of a giant big consciousness factor for that. Um, yeah, I know it's really good. And also something you touched on too is that, a lot of people who come from certain traditional backgrounds, they have been told that anything having to do with this, having a dream with precognition, thinking about something before it happens and having it happens, that again, demons have jumped into their brain somehow and are messing. And that's where all this information is coming from. That's not the case. It's good that people are kind of getting away from that area, I think. Um, there's a lot of different, you've seen Christian pastors and different people on the YouTube now that are very much taking kind of a proactive stance about this thing and saying, look, you have God-given powers. This stuff did not all come from something terrible. You've got God-given powers. Live the right way, but this is not an evil thing you need to be afraid of. And then that kind of has also jumped into the idea of quote unquote, most popular word in this kind of industry right now is manifestation and manifesting your reality and your manifestation mindset. How does if somebody is really looking to try and they're into this, right? And they're wanting to try to kind of change their life and have that manifestation mindset. How do intuition and manifestation or manifestation and just spirituality, how does that all kind of interconnected for you?
Well, I'll take the piece about spirituality first, in that I would say that depending on a person's belief system, so what is spirituality? There's different definitions I've seen over the years. I think one way of looking at spirituality is what we might perceive as the invisible world, connecting to the invisible world, or what we take as the invisible world, although it's not really, but that,
Right.
outside of what we perceive as the physical world. And also that for some people, it is, first of all, spirituality is unique to everybody about what their belief is about it, first and foremost. And spirituality may be a connection to something greater than ourselves, like you and I have already ascertained, right? If we are that one consciousness, that is spirituality. It is the oneness. It is the benevolent, loving, guiding, intelligent force that we are all a part of. We're not separate from. And I would suggest that when we connect with intuition, we're getting back into the flow of that awareness that is there for our highest good and greatest joy and for everybody. It may be that intuition can help us make the best choices so we don't have to maybe suffer or struggle as much. Now, again, that's a belief, and maybe we do have experiences that cause us to suffer so that we maybe make changes that are better for us, or at least we're given the opportunity to say, hey, is this really working for me and what would be better? And intuition can guide us on what is that best path for us. I had a conversation with a gentleman named Christian Sunberg who has memories of his life before coming here, pre-birth memories. And if I recall correctly from that interview, he talks about how he was shown a probability tree of what could happen in life. So this is where we kind of get into free will and
Yeah.
destiny or divine will or pre-planned,
Yeah.
again, depending on a person's
Soul
belief.
contract.
Yeah, exactly. And his experience is that he was shown this probability tree of if you take this path, this is likely to happen. If you take this path, this is likely to happen. So A, B, C, D, all the way down to the different permutations of the different branches of choices. And I've come to think of intuition that perhaps it's more like that path A or path A or B, where we can get guidance and information and follow that path. So we're going to more joyfully experience life and be in the flow with our own lives in a way that's more effortless for us.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So it just gets, so sort of the manifestation happens naturally.
So as far as a manifestation, thank you. So that was the other piece to your question. It can happen naturally as we get more and more into the state of intending to align with whatever you want to align with that's benevolent for you, meaning whether you have specific goals. I would suggest that your intuition can help you with, is that goal really, is going and getting that degree really going to serve me in my life? I've had to make this decision in my life. Do I want to go and get an advanced degree? In fact, my book, I did contemplate going and getting a master's or doctorate, but my intuition said no. Write this book and get it out to the world now. And I'm so glad I did, because it was endorsed by fabulous people. Many other experiences have happened because of in my life from writing that book. It's more in the public awareness than if I wrote a dissertation, although our thesis, I could have published that anyway. But that would have been many years of me going to school, but the timing needed to happen for me to put that book out to the world at the time. So I manifested or created and manifested a book, and I received knowledge about, so that's the intuition of, okay, what is my best path forward? And it really is about sharing, or one of the pieces I serve in several different ways, but teaching and sharing about intuition is one of the primary ways. And then once we get that information, we can be more in alignment with what is for our highest good and greatest joy. So if I just looked at logic, if I just listened to what my dad had said, which I may still get an advanced degree at some point, I would have done that, but it would have been arduous. It would have been, who knows? I might have gotten sick if I had taken that path, like mentally or physically. It might have it wouldn't have resonated with me. In fact, that's how I got out of mainstream healthcare, because it wasn't working for me. I had to work in other ways. And I used to think like, oh, there's something wrong with me that I couldn't stay in the clinics and work that way. Well, no, I was meant to go outside of it and help share other ways. And there's wonderful ways that people are serving in clinics. But for me, in the hospitals, for me, it was to go a different path. Then once we receive that information, we can get in alignment with what is for our highest good and greatest joy, and then intend for that to happen. Now, sometimes it just naturally happens where you get signs and synchronicities. Like I'll give you a brief example. Both of my parents passed in the last 2 to 4 years, and so did my mother-in-law. So I received items from them, and I was cleaning up in my bedroom, and I noticed how many wool items I have. I like to knit, but I also have many wool items. I'm in Minnesota. It gets cold here in the wintertime. And I thought, I really want to get back into knitting more, but I don't really want to do that until it'd really be nice to have a 100-year-old cedar chest to do that because of moths. I don't want to have moths. Well, I have my wool items in a closet with cedar blocks, but that's not airtight enough for me. A few days later, a second cousin, so my dad's first cousin, contacts me and says, would you like the cedar chest? It was Grandma Emma's, which is my great grandmother,
Mhm.
Emma, who I am named after. Well, I didn't know. I mean, she's been dead since 9, 10 months before I was even born. I never met her. I didn't even know this cedar chest existed. Now, did I manifest that cedar chest, or was I precognitive and I listened to that my cousin was going to offer me that cedar chest? Anyway, it's in my living room now, but it arrived in my life. And so that's when we get in alignment, we attract what is going to serve us and what we need in our lives. Not always necessarily what we want, although it often can
Yeah.
be, because when you get in alignment with your intuition, you're going to find that is really what you want. And then and I would suggest that you're going to have a more joyful, peaceful, healthier life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely fantastic.
And Ryan,
I
let me
don't,
just say one other little
yeah,
piece about that, about the manifestation. There are other
yeah.
people who have suggested that you can simply, there's a term called law of attraction. I write about this in my book, where you can simply think
Mhm.
about what it is you want. I would suggest that intuition is going to help you get in alignment with what's really going to serve you the most, because if you try to attract something that, let's say that you want to win $1 million or $10 million, maybe that's going to help you in your life, but maybe it actually bring problems, or maybe there's other experiences that your soul wants to have, that having that money, you would just become lazy, or maybe devolve into, other habits that maybe aren't really going to serve you. So the thought is that you think about what you don't want, you think about what you do want, you focus on what you want, and that you think about it each day, but you also do it from a place of feeling, not just the thought, and also from a place of as though you already have it. And additionally, what will it bring to you in your life? How will you feel differently if you have that? So people think, I want more money. Okay, if you want more money, what is that money going to bring you?
Right.
Well, I want more
What are you going to
freedom.
spend it on?
What do you get? Yeah, what is it you want to spend it on? What do you want to obtain? But if you spend it on something, what are those experiences going to do for you personally and for your own being and soul? And to focus on those feelings. And so, and that's why I'm a fan of listening to intuition first, is because if you're going to manifest something that might not be in alignment with you, it might not be a big deal, but it could also bring challenges in your life that aren't necessarily helpful.
Yeah, that's great. I love the fact that you brought up winning the lottery, because isn't that what everybody's key manifestation is for? Usually at first. Then there's this thought that goes into people's head, or at least I hope it pops in, to say, here in the state of Illinois, there's probably at least 100,000 people that all are trying to win the grand prize lottery on Friday night. So, like in the movie Evan Almighty, if we all win and everybody gets $1, that really is not what everybody was looking for. But other different people I've heard, talk on the same subject. And, do you want to create a vision board that just says I win the lottery, or do you want to create a vision board with pictures of where you're going to travel? And let the universe bring that opportunity to you. Just like you said, I don't need X amount of dollars given to me by somebody so I can buy a cedar chest. I just would like a cedar chest, and the universe kind of delivers it. Let the universe do its thing. It knows what's out there. And the other thing you talked about too, there's a lot of different things people think that they really need in their life, or, oh, I need this. I need to be successful in this particular position career-wise. And I don't know how many times I've heard them then say afterward, they're like, yeah, you know what? That was the worst decision. I hated that job. I didn't really want to be there. I was just trying to make money so I could provide for my family. And when I focused on what would I be happy doing that I could make money at, suddenly this opportunity just gets dumped in their lap. They run into an old fraternity buddy who has a business doing that exact same thing and is looking to hire somebody for that particular job. It's just the weirdness happens. But yeah, you got to let the universe kind of do its thing in that area there. I do not personally, I don't have any more questions or anything like that. Is there anything else you'd like to go over? Anything you'd like, the viewers to come to know?
Thank you for that, Ryan. I think we've covered a lot, and I think you have excellent questions that you've asked me, and I've enjoyed this conversation. I would just encourage everybody to listen to that inner knowing and to move in the next step or direction that you know and feel is right for you. Whether that's picking up my book, somebody else's book, listening to more of Ryan's fabulous podcasts, if it's knowing that there's a meditation or yoga studio around the corner that you've always been interested in and you just haven't had the
Check it out.
felt you've had the time or the interest to try it, but maybe this has given you a little impetus to check that out, to go with that and just follow that and see where it leads you. And I really do believe that this is aligning with our deep soul's knowing, your deep soul's knowing. And it's a beautiful, joyful journey to be on. And I also like how you mentioned a vision board, because you can create something physical in your outer world to help you connect with what it is you want to manifest. And then just by connecting with that on a daily basis, and just notice what you attract in your life and how that comes to you. And Bernard Beitman, who's a psychiatrist we've had on New Thinking Aloud a few times as a guest, has written about meaningful coincidences and serendipities and synchronicities. And one can suggest that the more that we have those experiences and follow them or pay attention to them and open and allow for them to happen, the more they occur. And it might be that that's supporting you with your own knowing that you are on the right path in your life. Whatever that is for you. Yeah.
Yeah. That is wonderful. Awesome. Emmy, thank you so much again for being on the show. We greatly appreciate it. Everybody pick up the book. We'll plug. You want to hold it up?
Oh, yeah. I've got it right
See what it
here.
looks like there.
Yeah. Intuitive Development, How to Trust Your Inner Knowing for Guidance with Relationships, Health, and Spirituality. And my website's emmyvadnais.com. They can check it out there, and it's on Amazon. It's also in print, ebook, and audiobook. I narrated it, and Jeffrey Mishlove narrated the forward.
Oh, that's great. I love when authors narrate their books instead of somebody else. I think that adds so much value, because you can express it the way you wanted to express everything and all of that. Yeah.
And if you don't want to get the book, there's playlists on my channel that can help you connect with your intuition. And again, just follow what's guiding you, that you know in yourself it's benevolent, it's good for you. Listening to the goodness that's guiding you within yourself.
Absolutely excellent. Emmy, I'm going to put all of that different information will be will be for the video. So everybody, yes, please go and check that out and have a wonderful day. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.